I asked Nick what he thought. What could his father have done? But Nick had no answer. Not at a dinner, maybe not ever. Maybe there was nothing Rob could do.
Nearly 3 weeks have passed since the heartbreaking incident involving Rob Reiner and his wife shook Hollywood. But the deeper you look, the more this story unravels into layers of quiet turmoil and chilling secrets that were never spoken aloud. While the headlines focused on the shock, the real story hides in the quiet corners where the pain and fear of this family lived for years. Few people know that it wasn't Rob and Michelle's daughter, Rory, who made the emergency call that day. The moment she stepped into that house, her world completely shattered. Seeing what she saw left her frozen in disbelief. She collapsed on the spot, unable to even form words. It was actually the person who accompanied her that grabbed the phone and called for help. But that's just the beginning. Behind the surface of this tragedy were Rob's quiet cries for help, his late-night confessions to close friends about the tension at home, his growing fear of his own son, and the haunting reality that police had been called to their picture-perfect Brentwood home several times before. From the outside, it looked like a model Hollywood family. Inside, something was slowly breaking apart. The Reiners didn't just hide their pain. They lived with it every single day in silence, pretending everything was fine. In this story, every missing piece leads to another revelation that'll make you stop and wonder how much you ever really knew. It all started when a massage therapist arrived at the Reiner mansion that quiet Sunday afternoon, December 14, 2025. She was there for the couple's usual weekly appointment, something Rob and Michelle never missed. But this time, no one answered the door. What she discovered next would change everything. This appointment had always been routine, a standing session that usually happened between 2 and 300 p.m. But on that quiet Sunday afternoon, something felt maybe the whole movie, I thought, was. Rob coming to terms with that inescapable fact. And all the cheer and the pride, well-earned as it was, could simply not illuminate that darker, more severe reality. Off from the very start. When the massage therapist arrived at the Reiner family's pristine white gate and rang the bell, there was only silence. No answer, no footsteps, nothing. After knocking several times and calling both Rob and Michelle with no success, the therapist's concern quickly grew into panic. Desperate, she reached out to their daughter, Romy Reiner, who lived just a few minutes away. That silence, that strange, unnatural quiet was the very first sign that something wasn't right. Romy didn't hesitate. She rushed over to her parents' mansion, expecting maybe a small misunderstanding or a missed call. But what awaited her inside would forever divide her life into before and after. When she opened that front door, she wasn't afraid, just slightly uneasy. But the moment her eyes met what was inside, everything changed. She froze completely. There, lying motionless, was her father, Rob Reiner. The world around her stopped. There's no human way to prepare for a sight like that. Her mind couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. She screamed, panicked, and ran out of the house, her body moving faster than her thoughts could catch up. In that moment of chaos, she had no idea her mother, Michelle, was also gone in another part of the mansion. Despite what's often been reported, Romy wasn't the one who called 911. So, who did? And why does that detail matter so much? It turns out she wasn't alone when she entered that house. Romy had been accompanied by a close male friend, a person deeply involved in both her personal and professional life at the time. He was the one who grabbed his phone and made that crucial emergency call moments after stepping into the home. This single fact has been misunderstood countless times, but it's important to understand psychological shock doesn't follow logic. When the human brain is hit with something unbearable, he had done everything he could do to help his son. He had even set in motion the Hollywood machine to help his son. And yet there was nothing he could do to fully help his son. Some things are beyond our greatest effort. That's heartbreaking. That's tough. It shuts down. People freeze, scream, or run without thinking. The inability to dial 911 in a moment like that isn't a sign of guilt. It's a sign of trauma. When your mind is flooded with disbelief and fear, reasoning just disappears. To make things even more confusing, early reports claimed Romy had discovered both of her parents at once. But that's not true. She only saw her father that day. The devastating news about her mother came later after police had already arrived. That means she was hit with not one but two life-altering shocks. Each one before she could even begin to recover from the last. And that's why the role of the man who accompanied her became so significant. He wasn't just a random bystander or casual friend. His name was Alex Silberg, and he played an important part in Romy's creative life. Someone she trusted, collaborated with, and leaned on during her career. His presence that day would become one of the most crucial and most misunderstood details in the entire story. Romy and Alex weren't just casual friends. They were creative partners building something together. The two had been working on a short film project where Romy played the central role and Alex served as the director. Their bond had been growing for years, marked by long trips, shared routines, and a rhythm that connected their lives in a quiet, unspoken way. Whether it was friendship or something deeper was never confirmed publicly, but one thing was certain. They trusted each other completely. When the tragedy was discovered, Romy instantly became a person of interest. Something that happens almost automatically in any major investigation. Yeah, it's tough because as a parent feels so right. Well, as a parent everybody runs into this at some point with a child where you want to will things to be true, right? That you think you can command things to happen, and you can't. And the most insecure you'll feel, the most vulnerable you'll feel as a parent is knowing there are some things that are outside of your control. Totally. Which is terrifying. She lived nearby. She was the first to arrive, and she was the one who saw the scene firsthand. In cases like this, those simple facts are enough for investigators to start asking questions. Not because of accusation, but because that's how every serious case begins. Who was closest? Who arrived first? Who saw what? And that's where Alex's presence became absolutely crucial. From both a legal and emotional standpoint, he was the anchor that helped establish exactly what happened that day. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the one who could confirm Romy's actions, her timeline, her emotional state, and her reaction in those horrific moments. His statement helped draw a clear picture. Romy wasn't wandering around aimlessly or acting strangely. She was with him the entire time. Alex's testimony became one of the key reasons the police were able to quickly rule out any suspicion toward Romy. Without him, things could have easily taken a darker turn. With rumors and speculation clouding reality, he was able to describe the panic, the shock, and the total emotional collapse that overtook her when she saw her father, showing clearly that what she experienced was raw human grief, not calculation or deceit. Because in moments like these, truth can get twisted fast. When information spreads quicker than facts, innocent people can get dragged into storms they don't deserve. Alex's presence made sure that didn't happen. He wasn't just a witness. He was also one of Romy's few emotional lifelines during the days that followed when everything around her was falling apart. Meanwhile, her brother Nick seemed to be drifting further away from social life. He wasn't working steadily, didn't appear to have a consistent support circle, and often kept to himself. Romy, on the other hand, kept moving. She stayed active with projects trying to hold on to some kind of normalcy in the middle of chaos. That difference between them, her quiet resilience and his growing isolation, painted a picture of two siblings living in the same world but walking entirely separate paths. In the moments after tragedy strikes, sometimes it's not the words people say, but who stays beside them that speaks the loudest. And in Romy's case, that person was Alex, the one who stood closest both physically and emotionally when her world shattered. Still, rumors began swirling almost immediately. Within hours, online chatter and misreported claims flooded the conversation. Some people even began saying Romy had pointed to her brother Nick as a suspect. But that wasn't true. Not at all. From the very beginning, Romy never directed blame at anyone. The confusion grew out of a mix of panic, fragmented reporting, and speculation spreading faster than verified information. What started as whispers quickly turned into headlines, twisting what really happened before anyone could even breathe. When emergency teams and police first arrived at the Reiner residence, what they found was heartbreaking. But the details in those early reports painted a clearer picture of what really happened. Despite all the rumors that had been swirling, Romy's behavior at the scene was calm, factual, and rooted in shock rather than suspicion. She didn't point fingers or make accusations. She simply explained the family's living arrangements, noting that her brother Nick lived on the property. It wasn't a claim. It was context, information meant to help responders understand who might have been home that day. Her words reflected someone in deep emotional shock, clinging to concrete facts because everything else was too overwhelming to process. Later, major outlets, including the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Independent, all confirmed that Romy never told police to investigate her brother. She only shared what she knew. From there, detectives built their own case, one that eventually led them to locate and arrest Nick later that same evening near the Exposition Park area in Los Angeles. But even as law enforcement followed its course, the emotional weight on Romy kept growing. Every statement she gave and even the silences between them were analyzed, questioned, and twisted by public speculation. It felt like every glance, every hesitation became something to dissect. She was already reeling from unthinkable loss. Yet now she found herself trapped inside a web of scrutiny where every word could be misunderstood. It's easy to forget that behind every headline stands a human being trying to survive the worst moment of their life. For Romy, it wasn't just about losing her parents. It was about facing the impossible idea that someone she grew up with, someone she shared every childhood memory with, might have been capable of crossing a line she couldn't even imagine. The family had long dealt with Nick's unpredictable behavior, and moments of destruction linked to his struggles with addiction. Broken furniture, shouting matches, and long nights weren't new. But what happened that day was something no one could have foreseen. It shattered the boundary between concern and horror. When Romy spoke to police, she mentioned one small but important detail: a gathering the night before at a mutual friend's home where both her parents and Nick had been present. That piece of information helped investigators trace the final movements leading up to the tragedy. But for Romy, what followed next was another wave of heartbreak. The moment she learned that her brother had been taken into custody. From that day forward, she carried two separate kinds of pain: the permanent loss of her parents and the devastating collapse of her bond with her only brother. Those two sorrows became inseparable, each memory of love shadowed by confusion and grief. Every day that passed forced her to look back through a new lens, one colored by loss, disbelief, and unanswered questions. From the outside, the Reiner's Brentwood mansion looked serene, gated, luxurious, and peaceful. But behind those walls, the atmosphere had been tense for years. Nick's presence brought with it a constant sense of instability, like walking through a house built on trembling ground. Daily life revolved around watching moods, easing tension, and hoping things wouldn't spiral. Police records show that this pattern stretched back over a decade. The first call came in August 2013. A welfare check made early one morning after someone feared a person inside might be in danger. 6 months later, neighbors reported loud disturbances in the middle of the night. Though by the time officers arrived, the mansion was silent again. Over time, these visits became almost routine. Flashing red and blue lights would illuminate the gates, leaving behind an uneasy calm once the sirens faded. Each incident was another reminder that peace in that home was fragile, constantly on the edge of breaking. But things escalated sharply on May 5, 2017. That's when an official domestic violence report was filed, marked in police records under the LAPD code for a family-related investigation. The details of that event were never released publicly, but it was enough to signal a turning point. The situation had grown too serious to dismiss as just another argument. From that point on, Nick's struggles were no longer confined to himself. They began to affect everyone around him. 2 more calls followed in 2019. One in February for another welfare check and another in September for what police described as a mental health emergency involving a male at the residence. Though officers eventually concluded no further action was needed, the most unsettling part was how familiar they had become with the Reiner address. Behind the gates of that multi-million-dollar mansion, life was no longer peaceful. It was a cycle of fear, hope, and exhaustion. The walls that once protected the family had become a silent witness to years of growing tension. Each police visit marking another moment when things nearly fell apart. In Brentwood, a neighborhood where police sirens are almost never heard, the Reiner home had become an exception everyone quietly noticed. Officers knew the road to that mansion by heart. They recognized the tall white gate, the lush hedges, and the uneasy quiet that always seemed to hang in the air. Each time a call came from that address, they responded calmly, handled the situation, and slipped away just as quietly, leaving behind a house that looked perfect but carried a storm inside. For years, The chaos inside those luxurious walls didn't always show itself in dramatic outbursts. It came through whispers, late-night shouting, and eerie silences that broke at odd hours. Neighbors would sometimes hear faint arguments echoing down the street or see Nick pacing the property at night, eyes distant, his face blank. Rob and Michelle learned to live on edge, balancing love with fear, always hoping the next day might be the one when things finally got better. But that hope ended on December 14, 2025. All those previous calls, the welfare checks, the noise complaints, the midnight interventions suddenly formed a clear pattern. They had been warnings all along. The home that once radiated warmth and laughter became the place where love and instability finally collided. It's devastating to realize that the same love that kept the family together also blinded them to the danger building within. The Reiner's mansion, once a symbol of success and devotion, turned into a place where too much love, too much hope, and too much denial met a breaking point. Looking back now, every police report, every restless night, every worried glance seems like another link in a chain leading to something no one wanted to believe could ever happen. But here's something few people knew. Nick Reiner hadn't lived inside the main mansion for years. He stayed in a separate guest house on the estate, a beautiful space worth millions, surrounded by gardens and tall fences. Despite his struggles, he never paid a cent for living expenses. His parents supported him with a generous monthly allowance of around $10,000 along with food and everything he could possibly need. Rob and Michelle had structured their lives around trying to help him heal. They monitored his behavior, checked in constantly, and adjusted their own routines depending on how he was doing. They knew about his relapses, his unpredictable moods, and his mental health battles. But their instinct as parents was always to protect, never to punish. Friends said that over the years, Nick had been to rehab more than a dozen times, at least 18 separate stays, and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Despite all that, his parents' support never wavered. They had weathered countless storms. Property damage, sleepless nights, moments where he disappeared and lived on the streets for short periods. Yet, through it all, no one in their circle ever saw Nick as violent toward others. To everyone who knew them, the Reiner home was filled with warmth, laughter, and endless second chances. Close friends often described their household as a big love fest, a place where family dinners turned into long conversations and where forgiveness came easily. Just 3 months before everything fell apart on September 9, 2025. The entire family appeared side by side at the red carpet premiere of This Is Final Tap 2. The end continues at the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles. Rob and Michelle beamed proudly, their arms around their children, Nick, Jake, and Romy, smiling as the cameras flashed. They looked like the picture of Hollywood happiness. That evening would turn out to be the last time the public ever saw them all together. Behind those bright smiles, people close to the family say Rob and Michelle were deeply worried. They had begun noticing how fast Nick's condition was worsening again. His unpredictable moods, his emotional swings, and moments of disconnection that were becoming harder to ignore. They loved their son fiercely, but love wasn't enough to save them from what was coming next. In the final weeks before the tragedy, Rob and Michelle confided to close friends that they were scared of their son. They spoke in hushed tones, describing Nick as unpredictable, sometimes even calling him a ticking time bomb. Their fear had reached a point where they no longer felt safe leaving him home alone. That's why, on the night of Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party, they insisted on bringing him along. Even though he wasn't on the guest list, the event was elegant and festive as it always was. Guests dressed in dark suits and glittering gowns, soft jazz playing under the warm hum of laughter. But among the crowd, one figure stood out sharply against all the glamour. Nick Reiner, 32 years old, appeared gaunt and pale, wearing a wrinkled gray hoodie with the hood pulled up. His hollow eyes wandered through the room, never focusing for long. He looked lost, like someone who didn't belong. Rob and Michelle had asked Conan's permission to bring Nick, explaining that they couldn't leave him alone that night. From the moment they arrived, though, Nick completely withdrew from them and the other guests. He drifted through the party like a shadow, quietly observing from corners, mumbling to himself, and startling people with his blank stare. Then came the moment that unsettled everyone. He started asking people the same question again and again in a flat, emotionless tone. "Are you famous?" It wasn't playful curiosity. There was no smile, no sense of humor, Just a mechanical loop that left people frozen in awkward silence. Guests tried to laugh it off, but as he repeated it over and over, the tension grew. Some said he'd step into their conversations uninvited, hovering too close, staring without blinking. The atmosphere that had been full of holiday warmth began to shift into something uneasy and cold. At one point, Nick approached actor Bill Burr, asked his full name, and repeated the same question. "Are you famous?" before turning away without another word. That strange behavior rippled through the party. People began whispering, casting nervous glances, and moving to the other side of the room. Nick didn't eat, didn't drink, just paced around the space like a restless ghost. Finally, Rob lost his patience. Embarrassed and exasperated, he raised his voice at Nick in front of everyone, telling him to stop acting out, to show respect, to stop making people uncomfortable. The room fell silent as the confrontation unfolded. Michelle stepped in, desperate to calm things down, but her face revealed helplessness and heartbreak. It was a moment of pain few parents could ever imagine, disciplining a son you love in public because you don't know what else to do. Moments later, the family quietly left the party. The drive home was heavy with silence. None of them could have known that it would be the last time Rob and Michelle would ever be seen in public again. That haunting question, "Are you famous?" would echo forever, like a warning no one understood until it was far too late. But this story isn't only about one person's breakdown. It's about a family's battle with invisible struggles passed down through generations. And that brings us to something deeply personal that many people overlook. Romy herself once fought her own battle with addiction and depression. In a 2022 podcast, Romy opened up about how those same shadows that haunted Nick had touched her too. She spoke candidly about her teenage years, describing days when she couldn't even get out of bed, when anxiety and nightmares made every night feel like a war zone. "In my dreams, I fight to survive," she said. "Sometimes I dream I have to hurt people just to escape." Those weren't words of violence. They were the cries of someone who had lived through years of emotional turmoil. Romy eventually realized something that broke her heart. Her father had carried the same silent struggle. Rob Reiner had battled depression for most of his life. It wasn't fleeting sadness. It was a quiet lifelong weight he carried while still building a brilliant career, raising his children and creating art that touched millions. He had learned how to live with pain, to keep moving forward even when the darkness never fully lifted. As Romy grew older, she began to see herself in him. The same patterns, the same emotional heaviness, the same quiet endurance. When she was diagnosed with the same condition, it didn't surprise her. It just confirmed what she had always sensed deep down. "Some things," she once said, "you don't inherit through blood. You inherit them through silence." From the outside, the Reiners looked perfect, famous, successful, loved. But inside, their story was one of resilience, constantly tested by unseen storms. It was a reminder that no amount of fame or money shields anyone from mental pain. Rob battled it quietly. Romy confronted it openly, and Nick lost himself to it. With Nick, the tragedy wasn't only his mental illness. It was how he tried to cope. He sought escape through addiction, and every time he slipped deeper, the walls around him closed in tighter. When someone fragile turns to substances to drown their pain, they aren't healing. They're multiplying their suffering. What begins as a way to numb the hurt soon becomes a trap. And behind it all, there's another layer few people talk about. How being overly sheltered can quietly build the foundation for self-destruction. Nick had grown up in comfort, surrounded by wealth, rarely facing consequences for his actions. What was meant as love and protection turned into something else entirely. That pampering, that endless cushion from reality, gave his addiction room to grow. For over a decade, that cycle continued. Help, relapse, forgiveness, repeat. Each attempt to save him only pulled the family deeper into heartbreak. In the end, it wasn't lack of love that destroyed them. It was love without limits. The kind that gives and gives until there's nothing left to give. For Nick Reiner, drugs stopped being just an escape. They became a daily ritual, a reflex, something that felt safe even as it destroyed him. Whenever things spiraled out of control, he turned back to that same crutch. And the heartbreaking part, his family's love. Their constant urge to protect him unknowingly helped that cycle continue. They weren't blind or careless. They were parents caught in a cruel dilemma between protection and enabling. Two forces that can look painfully alike when you love someone too much. Nick's mental health battle had deep roots. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia years earlier, a severe condition that causes delusions, confusion, and distorted thinking. But that was only part of the storm. Add to it a long history of heroin, cocaine, and meth use dating back to his teenage years, and at least 18 different rehab attempts, and you get a life lived on the edge of chaos. In the weeks leading up to December 14, 2025, something critical happened. Nick's doctors adjusted his medication. Sources later confirmed that around 3 to 4 weeks before the incident, his antipsychotic prescription was changed. What was supposed to help him stabilize instead made him spiral even more. People close to the family said they saw the shift immediately. His mood swings became sharper, his behavior more unpredictable, and his outbursts harder to manage. Rob and Michelle felt like they were walking on glass. Every day, hoping the new treatment would help, yet quietly terrified that it might already be too late. He became restless, volatile, and at times frighteningly detached. One moment calm, the next storming with emotion that came out of nowhere. For parents who had given everything, it was like living beside a fuse they couldn't see but knew was burning fast. Now the case rests in the hands of high-profile attorney Alan Jackson, the same lawyer who once represented Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey. Jackson is reportedly preparing a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. If that argument succeeds, Nick wouldn't serve time in prison. Instead, he'd be sent to a secure psychiatric facility for mandatory treatment, potentially for the rest of his life or until he's deemed stable enough to live outside supervised care. Under California law, the insanity defense can only apply if the defendant at the time of the act could not understand what they were doing or tell right from wrong due to mental illness. In Nick's case, the schizophrenia diagnosis, extensive treatment history, and recent medication change provide a significant basis for that argument. His parents had been paying roughly $70,000 per month for his care at a high-end mental health facility. Proof of how deeply they were trying to help. But even with all of that, winning such a case is extremely rare. Only about 1% of criminal defendants in the U.S. even attempt an insanity plea. And of those, only a fraction succeed, especially in California, where juries tend to view it with skepticism. Prosecutors may argue that Nick's long-term substance abuse clouded his judgment, independently of his mental illness, weakening his legal protection. Even so, emphasizing his schizophrenia and medication change could still help his defense team negotiate a plea deal. Perhaps a reduction from first-degree charges to something like voluntary manslaughter or a transfer to a mental health facility instead of a standard prison sentence. For now, the trial remains delayed pending further psychiatric evaluations. And Jackson hasn't officially confirmed the defense strategy. The next scheduled court date is January 7th, a date that could determine how this entire story unfolds from here. But even beyond the courtroom, this tragedy leaves behind haunting questions. How many warnings were missed? How many chances were there to step back before everything went too far? And how many times do families like the Reiners cry for help only to be lost in the cracks between love and the system meant to protect them? At the heart of all this stands Rob Reiner. Not just a filmmaker, but a deeply compassionate man who always sought truth in his art and empathy in his life. He was someone who believed in humanity, even when it showed its darkest sides. His story reminds us that behind fame and fortune are people fighting silent battles that the world never sees. And perhaps that's where this story must pause. Not because it's over, but because there's more still hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be understood. The unanswered questions, the missing pieces, the emotional truths, they all deserve to be explored with care and honesty. If this story touched you, if you still feel the echoes of what happened in your heart, don't look away. Stay with us. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Share your thoughts in the comments below and join us next time as we continue uncovering the truth one story at a time.